हेलो फ्रेंड्स, कैसे हैं आप लोग। आज आप लोगों के लिए एक बहुत ही इम्पोर्टेंट टॉपिक जो मैंने सेलेक्ट किया है वो है पेरिस एग्रीमेंट। आज हम लोग डिस्कस करेंगे कि व्हाट इज़ पेरिस एग्रीमेंट एंड हम ये देखेंगे कि हाउ डज़ द पेरिस एग्रीमेंट वर्क, कैसे पेरिस एग्रीमेंट वर्क करता है। एंड थर्ड पार्ट होगा हमारे डिस्कशन का कि व्हाट इज़ द प्रोग्रेस ऑफ पेरिस एग्रीमेंट टिल नाउ। एंड फोर्थ पार्ट होगा कि व्हाट वी अचीव्ड सो फार बाय दिस एग्रीमेंट, और इंडिया का क्या जो स्टेप है एज ए सिग्नेटरी ऑफ पेरिस एग्रीमेंट, क्या इंडिया ने स्टेप लिया है, उस पर डिस्कस करेंगे। चलिए स्टार्ट करते हैं। पहला है हमारा कि व्हाट इज़ पेरिस एग्रीमेंट। So, the Paris Agreement is a legally binding international treaty on climate change. It was adopted by 196 parties at COP21. COP21 basically that is Conference of Parties 21 in Paris uh, on December 12th, 2015 में ये कॉन्फ्रेंस ऑफ पार्टीज 21 हुआ था पेरिस एग्रीमेंट के लिए। So, and entered into force on November 4, 2016. Its goal is to limit global warming to well below 2, preferably to 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. Uh, to achieve this long-term temperature goal, countries aim to reach global peaking of greenhouse gas emission as soon as possible to achieve a climate neutral world by mid-century. The Paris Agreement is a landmark in the multilateral climate change process because, for the first time, a binding agreement brings all nations into a common cause to undertake ambitious effort to combat climate change and adapt to its effects. सो नाउ हम इस पे बात करते हैं हाउ डज पेरिस एग्रीमेंट वर्क। सो implementation of Paris Agreement requires economic and social transformation based on the best available science. The Paris Agreement works on a 5-year cycle of a increasingly ambitious climate action carried out by countries. Countries submit their plans for climate action known as Nationally Determined Contributions (NDCs). In their NDCs, countries communicate actions they will take to reduce their greenhouse gas emission in order to reach the goals of Paris Agreement. Countries also communicate in the NDC, that is nationally determined contributions, actions they will take to build resilience to adapt to impact of rising temperatures. So, actions they will take to build resilience to adapt to the impact of rising temperatures. Long term strategies. So, what is the long term strategy under NDCs? To better frame the efforts towards the long term goal, the Paris Agreement invites countries to formulate and submit long term low greenhouse gas emission डेवलपमेंट स्ट्रैटेजीज, इसको LTLEDS भी कहते हैं, लॉन्ग टर्म लो ग्रीन हाउस गैस emission development strategy. LTLEDS provide the long term horizon to the NDCs. Unlike NDCs, they are not mandatory. Nevertheless, they have a NDCs in the context of countries' long term planning and development priorities, providing a vision and direction for future development. Now we will track the progress. Uh, uh, with the Paris Agreement, countries established an enhanced transparency framework, that is ETF. Under ETF, starting in 2024, countries will report transparently on actions taken and progress in climate change, mitigation, adaptation measures, and support provided or received. It also provides for international procedures for the review of the submitted reports. The information gathered through ETF will feed into the global stock take which will assess the collective progress towards the long-term climate goals. This will lead to recommendation of countries to set more ambitious plan in the next round. So our fourth section now is what is achieved so far. अभी तक हमने क्या achieve किया है by Paris Agreement. Although climate change action needs to be massively increased to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement, the years since its entry into force have already sparked low carbon solutions and new markets. More and more countries, regions, cities, and companies are establishing carbon neutrality target. Zero carbon solutions are becoming competitive across economic sectors representing 25% of emissions. The trend is most noticeable in the power and transport sectors and has created many new business opportunities for early movers. By 2030, zero carbon solutions could be competitive in sectors representing over 70% of global emissions. AIPA of India. So AIPA is basically ये हमारा एपेक्स कमिटी फॉर इम्प्लीमेंटेशन ऑफ पेरिस एग्रीमेंट्स इसका फुल फॉर्म हुआ. सो इन अनदर मूव दैट अफर्म्स इंडिया सीरियसनेस टू वॉक द टॉक on climate change, the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change has constituted a high-level interministerial apex committee for implementation of Paris Agreement that we called AIPA-IPA under the chairmanship of Secretary, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. The purpose of AIPA is to generate a coordinated response on climate change matters that ensures India is on track towards meeting its obligation under Paris Agreement, including its nationally determined contributions. Senior officials from 14 ministries will serve as members to AIPA, who will oversee the progress in implementation of India's NDC and receive periodic information updates to monitor, review, and revisit climate goals to fulfill the requirement of the Paris Agreement. Another key function of AIPA would be to operate as national authority to regulate carbon markets in India under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, formulate guidelines for consideration of project or activities under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, issue guidelines on carbon pricing, market mechanism, and other similar instruments that have a bearing on climate change and NDCs. It will take note of the contribution of the private sector as well as multi bilateral agencies in the field of climate change and provide guidance for aligning their climate actions with national priorities. The year 2021 would mark the beginning of implementation of the Paris Agreement, and constitution of IPA is central to strengthening the national system and institutional arrangement for implementation and monitoring of climate actions. It will also ensure that India maintains its climate leadership as one of the few countries in the world whose climate actions are consistent with the goals of Paris Agreement. Thank you.